Ed. Victoria Lane snatched the microphone from the stand, pointed her finger straight at the man in the worn-out suit, and laughed into a live broadcast watched by 11 million people. Ed. Baby, this isn't open mic night at a diner, the audience exploded. Ed. The cameras zoomed in on a man who didn't flinch, didn't apologize. Ed. Didn't walk away. He just stood there, a mechanic, a single father, a nobody holding a cheap microphone like it was the only thing in the world that still belonged to him. Ed. And then he opened his mouth. What came out of that man silenced 11 million people at once. Ed. But nobody could have predicted what happened backstage 30 minutes later, and that's the part nobody has told you yet. Ed. Drop a comment with your city right now. I want to see how far this story travels. Ed. And if you're new here, hit subscribe because this one's going to stay with you. Ed. The alarm went off at 4:47 a.m. Daniel Carter didn't hit snooze. Ed. He never did. Snooze was a luxury for people whose days started with possibilities. His days started with obligations, and he'd learned a long time ago that obligations didn't wait for a man to feel ready. Ed. He sat up on the edge of his mattress in the dark. Ed. The springs groaned under him. He'd been meaning to replace that mattress for 2 years. He'd also been meaning to fix the kitchen faucet that dripped every night like a metronome, replace the cracked window in Sophie's room that let in cold air every December. Ed. And paint over the water stain on the ceiling above the couch that looked like a cloud nobody asked for. Ed. He hadn't done any of those things, because doing any one of them required money that was already spoken for before it hit his bank account. Ed. He sat in the dark for exactly 60 seconds. He'd timed it once. Ed. 60 seconds of stillness before the whole machine of the day started turning. Ed. Just 60 seconds where he didn't have to be anybody's anything. Ed. Then he stood up. He pulled on his work pants from the chair where he'd left them the night before. Ed. Dark gray, worn at the knees, his name was stitched in red thread above the left pocket, Danny. Ed. Practical, clear. The kind of name tag that told the world exactly what he was, a man who worked with his hands and got paid by the hour. He walked to the kitchen in his socks, flicked on the light above the stove, the only light he turned on, because Sophie was still asleep, and started the coffee maker. Ed. While the coffee dripped, he made her lunch. He did this every single morning. Ed. Peanut butter and strawberry jam on wheat bread, cut diagonal because she'd told him once, when she was 5, that triangles tasted better than rectangles. Ed. She was 8 now. She'd probably forgotten she ever said it. He hadn't. He added a small bag of pretzels, a juice box, and a note. Ed. He wrote a different note every day. Sometimes it was a joke. Ed. Sometimes a drawing. He was a terrible artist, and Sophie loved reminding him of that. Ed. Sometimes it was just 3 words, I love you. This morning he wrote, you are braver than you think. Ed. He didn't know why those words came to him. Ed. He folded the note. Ed. Tucked it beside the juice box. Ed. Zipped the bag. Ed. And set it by the front door. Ed. The coffee finished. He poured a cup, stood at the kitchen counter, and drank it in silence. Ed. His phone buzzed at 5:14 a.m., a text from his foreman, Roger. Ed. Elevator 4 at the Meridian Tower, stuck between 17 and 18. Ed. Tenant is already calling the building manager. Be there by 6:30. Ed. Daniel typed back, on my way. He drank the last of his coffee, rinsed the cup habit, not necessity, and walked to Sophie's doorway. Ed. She slept the way she always slept, on her stomach, arms out to the sides, face turned toward the window. Ed. Her hair was spread across the pillow in a mess that would take 15 minutes to untangle in the morning. Ed. She had her mother's hair, dark brown and wild and beautiful. Ed. He didn't go inside the room. He just stood in the doorway and looked at her for a moment. Ed. He did this every morning too. It kept him straight. Ed. On hard mornings, the mornings when he was exhausted before the day even started, the mornings when the bills piling up on the counter made his chest tight, looking at Sophie sleeping, reminded him exactly why none of that could stop him. Ed. Love you, baby girl, he said quietly, not loud enough to wake her. Ed. Just loud enough to mean it. He grabbed his jacket from the hook by the door, picked up his bag of tools, and walked out. Ed. The Meridian Tower stood 41 stories above downtown Chicago, all glass and steel, and the particular kind of arrogance that expensive buildings carry when they're surrounded by neighborhoods they've never noticed. Ed. Daniel arrived at 6:22 a.m. He signed in at the service entrance, never the main lobby, always the back, and rode the freight elevator up to 17. Ed. The stuck elevator was an older model, mid-90s, The kind that building management had patched and repaired so many times it was basically held together by institutional memory and Daniel's personal knowledge its quirks. He opened the access panel in the shaft and listened. He could hear the mechanical breathing of the building. The hum of the cables, the distant sound of the city waking up outside the walls. He put his hand on the guide rail and felt it. Every elevator had a personality if you paid attention. This one had been slipping for 3 weeks. He'd written it up twice. Both times, management had approved a temporary fix instead of the replacement it needed. Now it was stuck. He got to work. Inside the shaft, wedged between the 17th and 18th floors. He could hear the tenant, a woman. Middle-aged by the sound of her voice, talking to someone on her phone through the elevator doors. I'm going to be so late. This absolutely yes, I know. But I'm literally trapped in this elevator right now. Daniel called through the door. Ma'am, my name is Daniel with building maintenance. I'm going to have you out in about 8 minutes. Are you okay in there? A pause. 8 minutes? Yes, ma'am. 8 minutes. Fine, a beat. Thank you. He worked fast. He knew this machine. He knew exactly which relay was responsible for the failure, knew the sequence to reset the safety brake, knew how to coax the cab back to level without jerking it. His hands moved without hesitation, not because the work was simple, but because he'd done it enough times that his hands remembered even when his mind was somewhere else. 7 minutes and 40 seconds later, the elevator doors opened on 17. The woman stepped out, pulling a rolling briefcase behind her. She looked at Daniel once the gray pants, the name tag, the grease on his hands and said, thank you, the way people say it when they mean I've already moved on from this moment. She walked to the lobby elevator and was gone. Daniel stood alone in the hallway of the 17th floor and looked at the elevator. He'd patch it again, he'd write it up again, and in another month it would happen again. That was the job. He picked up his tools. He ate lunch alone on the loading dock behind the building. A sandwich he'd made for himself the night before, a bag of chips, a bottle of water. Around him, the city moved at its regular speed, trucks making deliveries. A group of pigeons working a crack in the concrete. The distant rhythm of traffic on Michigan Avenue. He wasn't unhappy. That was something people didn't always understand about him. They saw his life, the early mornings, the worn jacket, the single apartment in a building where the elevator in his own hallway sometimes didn't work, and they assumed he must be miserable. He wasn't. He was tired. There was a difference. He had Sophie. He had work that he was genuinely good at. He had the apartment, small as it was. He had the $32 left over at the end of this week after all the bills were handled, which he was going to let Sophie choose how to spend, probably on art supplies, because lately she'd been obsessed with painting. He had a life. It wasn't the life he'd once imagined. But it was his. He finished his sandwich and pulled out his phone to check the afternoon schedule. 2 more jobs, one at a hotel on Wacker and one at a medical building on the north side. He calculated the drive times, made a mental note to text Sophie's after-school program to let them know he'd be picking her up at 5:30 instead of 5. A voice note appeared on his phone. From Sophie. He almost always listened to them immediately. He pressed play. Daddy, it's me. A pause. She always started voice notes with it's me, even though her name was on the contact and there was no one else in the world who called him Daddy. I did something, and I don't know if you're going to be mad or if you're going to be happy. Mrs. Patterson said when you do something because you love someone, even if it's a little scary, it's the right thing. So I did it because I love you, and also because you deserve it. Okay, bye, I love you, bye. He listened to it again. He texted her. Did what, Sophie? She didn't respond. She was in school. He sat with that for a moment. Then he put his phone in his pocket and went back to work. He found out 3 days later. He was in the kitchen after dinner, Sophie in the bath, when his phone rang from a number he didn't recognize. Chicago area code. He almost let it go to voicemail. Robocalls had become a part-time occupation, it seemed, but something made him answer. Is this Daniel Carter? It is, Mr. Carter. My name is James Whitfield. I'm a producer with America's Hidden Voices on Channel 7. A pause to let the name land. Your daughter submitted your name to our open audition. We listened to the video she attached. She filmed you singing in your apartment, Mr. Carter. I want to say with complete sincerity that what I heard was remarkable. Ed, we'd like to invite you to audition for our show. Ed, Daniel stood completely still. He looked at the hallway. Ed, the bathroom door was closed. He could hear the water. Ed, he could hear Sophie in there, singing to herself the same way she always sang in the bath, slightly off-key and completely unself-conscious. Ed, she filmed me, he said. She did, about 4 months ago from the sound of it. Ed, a little shaky, she was hiding around the corner, I think. Ed, Daniel closed his eyes. He remembered that night. He'd thought Sophie was asleep. Ed, he'd been sitting at the kitchen table after a brutal week 3 elevator breakdowns in 2 days, a problem with Sophie's tuition payment for the after-school program, and the anniversary of losing his wife, sitting on his chest like a stone. Ed, he'd sat at the table and he'd started to sing, not for any reason he could have explained. Ed, just because it was the only thing that had ever made the weight lift even slightly. Ed, he'd sung for 20 minutes, alone in the kitchen, thinking no one was watching. Ed, what song did she send, he asked. Heaven's Door, Whitfield said. The Victoria Lane piece. Of course she had. Sophie had been obsessed with that song since she was 5. Ed, she used to make Daniel sing it to her at bedtime. Ed, he hadn't sung it for an audience since before everything changed. Ed, I appreciate the call. Daniel said, I don't think I'm what you're looking for. Ed, Mr. Carter, I fix elevators. I'm 43 years old. Ed, I haven't performed anywhere in more than 10 years. Ed, I think your audience deserves better than. Your daughter wrote us a letter too. Ed, Daniel stopped. She wrote us a letter by hand, 3 pages. Ed, she's 8 years old and she wrote 3 pages about her father. Whitfield's voice was quieter now. Ed, not a sales pitch anymore, something else. She wrote, and I'm reading directly here, my dad sings every night after he thinks I'm asleep. Ed, he sings because my mom used to love his voice. I think he stopped believing people want to hear him. Ed, I want to show him they do. The kitchen was very quiet. Ed, the water in the bathroom had stopped. Sophie was done with her bath. Ed, Mr. Carter, are you still there? Yeah, Daniel said. Ed, I'm here. He said yes. He didn't say yes that night. Ed, he thought about it for a week. Thought about it on the freight elevator at the Meridian Tower. Thought about it on the drive to Sophie's school. Ed, thought about it at 4:47 in the morning when the alarm went off and he sat on the edge of his mattress in the dark. He thought about the version of himself that had once stood on a stage at Greater Hope Baptist Church in front of 300 people and felt for the first time in his life that he was exactly where he was supposed to be. He thought about the version of himself that had walked away from that, not because he wanted to, but because life had required it. Ed, he thought about Sophie's letter, 3 pages, 8 years old. Ed, I think he stopped believing people want to hear him. Ed, he called the number back on a Tuesday evening. Sophie was doing homework at the kitchen table, her tongue slightly out the way it always was when she was concentrating. Ed, I'll do it, he told Whitfield, but I need to understand something first. Ed, if I go up on that stage, and I'm not what people expect if they laugh, I need to know Sophie won't be somewhere in that audience, watching her father get humiliated. Ed, Whitfield said. Ed, Mr. Carter. Ed, after hearing your voice. Ed, humiliation is not something I'm particularly worried about. Ed, but Sophie will be seated in a protected area with a production assistant. Ed, she won't be in the main floor audience unless you decide that's what you want. Ed, she stays protected. She stays protected. Okay, Daniel said. Ed, then I'll be there. He hung up. Sophie looked up from her homework. Ed, Dad? Who was that? He looked at his daughter, her mother's hair, her mother's eyes, that particular expression she made when she was watching him closely and pretending not to. Ed, someone from a TV show, he said. Her eyes went slightly wide. Ed, just slightly. The way a child's eyes go when they're trying very hard to look innocent. Ed, Sophie, you filmed me. She put her pencil down. Ed, she straightened up in her chair. And then, because Sophie Carter had never been the kind of child who backed down from anything, she looked her father directly in the eye and said, yes. Ed, and I sent it to them, and I wrote them a letter. And I'm not sorry. Ed, he stared at her. She stared back. You're not sorry, he said. Ed, no, that's my voice, Sophie. I didn't give anyone permission to. Ed, it's also my dad's voice, she said. And I think the whole world should hear it. Ed, so I'm not sorry. He held her stare for a long moment. Ed, and then he laughed. It was a real laugh, the kind that came from somewhere deeper than the moment. Ed. She watched him laugh, and then she started laughing too. And for a minute, they were just 2 people laughing in a small kitchen in Chicago at 10 minutes past 8 on a Tuesday night. Ed, you're going to be trouble your whole life, he told her. Ed, I know, she said. She picked her pencil back up. Ed, you're welcome. The day of the audition, Daniel put on the only suit he owned. Ed, it was navy blue. He'd bought it for his sister's wedding 6 years ago. Ed, it still fit. He hadn't gained a pound, mostly because he worked too hard and ate too practically to gain a pound, but it was dated. Ed, not stylish, not the kind of thing you'd see in a magazine. Ed, just a regular suit that a regular man had bought for a regular occasion and kept in a garment bag because you never knew. Ed, he stood in front of the bathroom mirror for longer than he usually stood anywhere. Ed, he looked at himself the way you sometimes do when you're trying to see what other people see, not what you know, not what you feel, but the external surface of a man. Ed, he saw gray at the temples, lines at the corners of his eyes that hadn't been there 5 years ago. Ed, a jaw that needed to be shaved more carefully than he had time for this morning. Ed, the suit slightly too formal in a way that somehow also managed to look too plain. Ed, the posture of a man who carried heavy things for a living. Ed, he practiced nothing. That wasn't arrogance. It was simply that he had no idea how to practice for something like this. Ed, he sang the way he always sang, not for an audience, not for applause, not for a judge's panel. Ed, he sang because the song had somewhere to go and he was the way it got there. Ed, Sophie was ready before him. She stood by the front door in a yellow dress with her hair in 2 braids that Daniel had done himself badly, but with effort, and she held a small sign she'd made on a piece of cardboard with her marker set. Ed, it said, "My dad is the best singer in Chicago." That's a bold claim, he told her. Ed, it's the truth, she said. He crouched down in front of her. Ed fixed one of the braids that had already started coming loose. Ed, she held very still while he did it, the way she only held still when something mattered. Ed, hey, he said. Hey, she said back. Whatever happens tonight, I need you to know something. Ed, what? You seeing me up there is already worth it. Ed, you understand? Whatever they say, whatever the judges think. Ed, the fact that you believed in me enough to write 3 pages and send it to a stranger, that's already the best thing that's happened to me in a long time. Ed, Sophie looked at him with her mother's eyes. You're going to be great, Daddy. Ed, up. Let's go find out, he said. Ed, the studio was larger than he expected and smaller than it looked on television. Ed. The production assistant, a young woman named Keeley, with a headset and a clipboard, met them at the entrance and walked them through the backstage area, pointing out where Daniel would wait before his name was called. Ed, where Sophie would be seated, where the monitors were if he wanted to watch other performers. Ed, she was professional and kind and spoke to Sophie directly, which he noticed and appreciated. Ed, they could hear the crowd on the other side of the wall. Ed, the sound of 2,000 people in a television studio is a specific kind of pressure, not quite sound, not quite feeling, something in between. Ed, Daniel stood backstage and listened to it. A man came off stage from the audition, before a young guy, maybe 22, with a guitar and a voice like warm honey. Ed, he walked past Daniel, flushed with adrenaline, headphones around his neck. Ed, how is it out there? Daniel asked. The kid looked at him. Ed looked at the suit, looked at the gray in his temples. Ed, big, the kid said. Big. Good luck, man. Ed, he walked away. Keeley appeared at Daniel's shoulder. Ed, you're next, Mr. Carter. About 2 minutes. Is there anything you need? Ed, no, he said. Thank you. Your daughter is settled in the family section. Ed, she's got a great sightline to the stage. Keeley paused. Ed, she told me to tell you, and I'm quoting, don't you dare mess this up. Ed, he laughed. That sounds right. She's something. Ed, she is, he said. The 2 minutes passed. His name was announced. Ed, and Daniel Carter, mechanic. Ed, single father. Ed, nobody in particular, walked out onto the stage of America's Hidden Voices in his navy blue suit and his clean work shoes. Ed, holding nothing. Ed, needing nothing. Ed, carrying only the weight of everything he'd ever survived. Ed, the lights hit him. The audience looked at him. Ed, and in the front judge's chair. Ed, Victoria Lane looked at him too, the most famous voice in America. Ed, 5 Grammys on her shelf. Ed, the woman who had built an empire on a single impossible note, and she smiled the smile of someone who had already decided what she was looking at. Ed, she leaned toward the microphone, and that was when it started. Ed, honey, Victoria said. Ed, and her voice carried the particular warmth of someone being generous to someone who doesn't deserve generosity. Ed, what exactly do you do for a living? Ed, the audience laughed a little. Not mean, not yet. Ed, just amused. Daniel looked at her steadily. I repair elevators, he said. Ed, more laughter, warmer, An elevator repairman on a singing stage. The crowd understood the joke, even if they weren't sure yet it was one. Elevators, Victoria repeated. She nodded as though filing this away as important information. And tonight you'd like to sing for us. Yes, ma'am. You've had vocal training, lessons, you've performed professionally? No to the first two, Daniel said. I sang at churches for about 12 years. Community events, that kind of thing. Victoria looked at the other judges, three of them, music producers and industry names, all watching this exchange with varying degrees of interest. Then she looked back at Daniel. And what are you going to sing for us tonight? At Heaven's Door, the studio went completely still. At Heaven's Door was Victoria Lane's song. Every person in that room knew it. Every person watching at home would know it. The final movement of the song contained a sustained high C, a note that had been analyzed, replicated, discussed in music programs and online forums and television specials dedicated to the greatest vocal performances of the past decade. Victoria had hit that note live, on stage, in a performance that had 300 million views. She had made that note her identity, and a man who repaired elevators had just announced he was going to sing it. Victoria Lane leaned back in her chair. She looked at the audience with an expression that said, "We're going to have fun with this one." You want to sing my song, she said. My daughter loves it, Daniel said simply. The audience murmured. Then someone laughed and it spread, and within seconds the studio was laughing, not with cruelty exactly, but with the specific amusement of people who knew what was coming and were comfortable being entertained by the distance between ambition and reality. Victoria tilted her head. Her smile was perfect, Mr. Carter, she said. Some dreams are better left as dreams. At a beat, the crowd absorbed it. Daniel stood completely still. He didn't argue, he didn't deflect, he didn't make a joke to soften the moment. He simply turned his head just slightly, just enough, and found his daughter in the family section at the side of the stage. Sophie was sitting forward in her chair, both hands clasped together in her lap, her cardboard sign resting against her knee. My dad is the best singer in Chicago. She caught his eye. She nodded once. He turned back to the stage. I'm ready, he told the musician at the keyboard. The music started. And for a moment, just the opening bars, just the first breath of it, the audience smiled at each other, the way you smile when you're braced for an accident. Then Daniel Carter opened his mouth and everything in that room changed. The first note Daniel sang was so quiet that the audience almost missed it. That was the trick of it. That was the thing nobody in that studio understood yet, that Daniel Carter did not begin a song the way a performer begins a song. He didn't announce himself. He didn't push. He didn't give the crowd a reason to pay attention. He simply started, soft, low, a single line barely above a whisper, as if the songs were something private he was sharing rather than something public he was performing. The piano underneath him was gentle, measured, finding its way into the room the same way he was, without force, without demand. The audience was still smiling, still waiting for the moment to laugh. Still holding the comfortable expectation that this was the part of the show where the underdog failed gracefully and everyone felt a little better for having witnessed the attempt. Victoria Lane had her chin resting in her hand, watching him the way a chess player watches a move they've already anticipated. Then Daniel went to the second line, and something shifted. It wasn't a trick, it wasn't a gimmick. It was simply that his voice, once it had found its footing, once it had decided it was safe to come forward, was not the voice anyone in that room had prepared themselves for. It was deep but not heavy, warm but not soft. There was a particular quality to it that the musicians in the room would later struggle to describe. Not trained, not raw, but something in between. Lived. That was the word one of the producers would use backstage an hour later. His voice sounds like a life lived. The smile on the woman in the third row faded first. Then the couple near the aisle. Then, one by one, like lights going out across a city block, the amusement in the faces of 2,000 people quietly became something else. Attention, real attention. The kind you can't fake and can't manufacture, the kind that happens in your body before your brain has decided to allow it. Victoria shifted in her chair. It was a small movement. Barely visible. But the cameras caught it. And 11 million people watching at home would catch it on their screens, the almost imperceptible moment when the most famous voice in America stopped being entertained and started listening. She didn't want to. That was the thing. You could see it if you watched closely enough. She didn't want to be moved by this man. She had built a very specific narrative in her head in the 30 seconds between his entrance and his first note, and now his voice was dismantling it bar by bar, and she was working hard not to let that show. Daniel sang on. He wasn't looking at the judges. He wasn't working the audience. His eyes were somewhere in the middle distance, focused on something nobody else in the room could see. Later, a journalist would ask him what he was looking at during that performance. And he would think about it for a moment before answering. Sophie's mother. Not a memory, not an image, just her. Just the feeling of her, which was the feeling he had always carried when he sang. The song built slowly. Victoria's original recording was known for its architecture, the careful way it esticulated, the way it held you at a certain height before letting you fall and catching you at the last moment. It was a technically precise performance, engineered and produced and perfected in a studio over months. What Daniel was doing was something different. He was not replicating the architecture. He was rebuilding it from inside, from the meaning of the words rather than the arrangement of the notes, from the story the song was actually telling rather than the story it had become famous for. And the difference was this: when Victoria Lane sang Heaven's Door, you heard an extraordinary voice. When Daniel Carter sang it, you heard an extraordinary man. The audience started to feel it around the 40-second mark. Not applause, not yet, but the energy in the room changed the way the pressure changes before weather. You felt it in your chest before you understood what it was. People who had been leaning back in their seats were leaning forward. Hands that had been in laps had moved to armrests. A woman in the 8th row put her hand over her mouth. Victoria noticed all of it. She straightened up, her eyes narrowed almost imperceptibly. She looked at the other judges, Marcus Webb, the record producer on her left, who was already nodding slowly. Not performing it, just nodding the way a man nods when something lands. And Diane Chen on the far end, who had her pen down and her notepad pushed to the side, both of which were things she did when she was no longer taking notes because she was too busy actually listening. Victoria looked back at Daniel. He was somewhere in the middle of the second verse, and his voice had climbed. Not dramatically. Not with the kind of theatrical escalation that trained performers use to signal the audience that something important is coming, but organically. The way a fire grows when you're not watching it, suddenly more than it was without the moment of becoming. A man in the front row said something to his wife, 2 words, leaning toward her. She nodded. A teenager in the upper tier, who had been on his phone since the show started, put his phone in his pocket. The woman in the 8th row still had her hand over her mouth. And Daniel Carter, elevator mechanic, single father, man in a 6-year-old Navy suit, Daniel Carter sang on. Then something happened that nobody was prepared for. The song reached the bridge, the emotional center. The moment in the composition where the singer is supposed to hold the audience at the edge of the peak before the final climb. Neil paused, not a miscue, not a loss of his place. A deliberate pause, a single half-beat of silence that he filled with a breath so controlled and so quiet that you heard it in the silence of 2,000 people holding their own. And then he turned his head, slightly, just enough, and he looked at Sophie. She was sitting forward in her seat, both hands clasped, the cardboard sign in her lap. She was 8 years old, and she was watching her father with the particular intensity of a child who understands, without being able to name it, that they are witnessing something that will matter to them for the rest of their life. He held her gaze for exactly 1 measure. Then he turned back, and sang the final movement of the song. What happened next would be discussed for months. Music critics would write about it. Vocal coaches would break it down in tutorial videos. A professor at Berkeley College would use a recording of it in a lecture on emotional authenticity in performance. But in the room in that moment, none of that analysis existed. There was only the note, the high C Victoria Lane's note. The note she had held for 6.5 seconds on the most watched live performance of the decade. The note that had made her the standard against which every other singer in America was measured. Daniel reached for it. The audience tensed. This was the moment they had all been waiting for, some hoping he'd make it. Some certain he wouldn't. Most somewhere in between. holding their breath without realizing they were holding it. He hit it clean, not a reach, not a strain, not the sound of a man pushing past his limit. Clean, full centered, and he held it 1 second. 2, 3. He held it past the point where the tension of the room peaked, held it past the point where someone in the balcony made a sound that wasn't quite a gasp and wasn't quite a word. Held it past the point where Victoria Lane's expression changed from studied neutrality to something she could not entirely control. 4 seconds. 5. He held it for 7.5 seconds. When he stopped, the silence lasted exactly 2 heartbeats. Then the theater erupted, not the polite applause of an audience being generous. Not the enthusiastic response of a crowd that enjoyed a performance. Something else, something rawer and less organized, the kind of reaction that happens in a room when 2,000 people are simultaneously knocked off balance by the same force. People were on their feet before they decided to stand. The sound was enormous and immediate. A wall of it, and it kept coming, building on itself. Daniel stood still in the center of it. He didn't raise his arms. He didn't bow dramatically. He didn't perform gratitude. He just stood there, holding the microphone, and for a moment his eyes closed, just briefly, just long enough to feel it, the sound of people who had heard him. Really heard him, the thing he had given up believing would ever happen again. He found Sophie. She was standing on her seat, both arms in the air. The cardboard sign raised over her head, turned sideways to fit. He laughed. He actually laughed, right there on stage, and the audience caught it, and the laughter spread, real and warm, and completely different from the laughter at the beginning of this night. And then he looked at the judges. Marcus Webb was on his feet, applauding. Diane Chen had both hands pressed together at her lips, not clapping, just holding herself. Victoria Lane was seated, the only one still seated. She was looking at Daniel with an expression that the cameras caught from 3 different angles, and that would be dissected, in the days ahead, an expression that was not quite anger, not quite admiration, not quite fear, but some difficult combination of all 3 that showed in the line of her jaw and the stillness of her hands, which were flat on the table in front of her, not applauding, not moving. Marcus leaned to the microphone first. Daniel, he shook his head. Not negatively, the kind of shake you give when you can't find the words. Daniel, I have been sitting in this chair for 4 seasons of this show, and I have never, and I want to be specific, I have never heard anything like what I just heard. Where has that voice been? Home, Daniel said mostly. At home, Marcus repeated and laughed. Folks, this man has been singing to himself at home. The crowd loved that. Diane Chen leaned forward. Mr. Carter, I want to ask you something, and I want you to give me an honest answer. When is the last time you sang in front of people? Daniel thought about it. My wife's memorial service, he said. 11 years ago. The room went quiet again, not the stunned quiet of the note. This was a different kind of quiet. After. The kind that happens when a truth arrives in a room it wasn't expected to enter. You sang at your wife's memorial, Diane said. She loved that song, Daniel said. Different version, older one, but she loved it. So I sang it. And then I had a daughter to raise, he said simply. There wasn't a lot of room for anything else. Diane nodded slowly. A woman in the second row was crying. She was trying to be discreet about it, pressing her fingers to the corners of her eyes. But her husband had his arm around her, and you could see her shoulders moving. Then everyone waited for Victoria. The room felt it, that collective pivot of attention, the whole theater turning toward the center, judged the way a compass turns north. She was the standard bearer in the room. She was the one whose name was attached to the song. Her response would be the verdict, and everyone knew it. Victoria Lane looked at Daniel for a long moment. Then she sat forward and took the microphone. That was a competent performance, she said. The room went very still. You have a strong voice. You clearly have natural ability. But I want to make something clear. She paused, and her voice took on the particular precision of someone choosing every word with deliberate care. This stage is not a community church. The people who compete on this show are professionals. They have trained their entire lives. You sang a song that I spent 3 years developing. The work that goes into a performance like that isn't visible. It isn't something that just happens. Another pause. Natural talent is a starting point. What you do with it over years of dedicated work, that's where the real music lives. Ed, she sat back. Applause polite, measured, the crowd trying to be respectful without being unkind. Ed, Marcus looked at Victoria. He said nothing, but the look said something. Ed. Daniel stood at the microphone and nodded slowly, the way a man nods when he's been told something he expected to be told and has already decided how to receive it. Ed, I appreciate that, he said. I do. Victoria tilted her head slightly. Ed, that's all, she said. There was something in her voice, the edge of something that wanted more reaction. Ed, a man who argued back gave her a dynamic to manage. Ed, a man who accepted with grace gave her nothing. What else would there be? Daniel said. Ed, you've got 5 Grammys. You've earned the right to an opinion. Ed, I came here to sing for my daughter. I did that a moment. Ed, then Marcus Webb said, well, I'll say what else there is. He sat forward. Ed, Victoria, with all due respect, what I just heard was not a community church performance. Ed, what I just heard was a vocal instrument that most people in this industry spend their entire careers trying to develop and never achieve. Ed, the note at the end, and I think everyone in this room wants to acknowledge that note that was a high C, held for longer than... Ed, I'm aware of what note it was, Marcus, Victoria said. Ed, I know you are, Marcus said evenly, which is exactly why I think your response is interesting. Ed, another silence. The audience felt it, the current running between the two judges, the thing that was being said underneath what was being said. Victoria's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Diane stepped in. Ed, the vote, she said, with the practiced diplomacy of someone who had navigated these moments before. Ed, Daniel, this is a simple yes or no from each of us. Ed, Marcus, yes, Marcus said immediately. Diane, Ed, absolutely yes. A pause. Every eye in the building turned to Victoria Lane. Ed, she was looking at Daniel, not at the audience, not at the cameras. At Daniel specifically, with an expression that had settled into something unreadable. Ed, Victoria, Diane said. Victoria reached forward, pressed the button on the panel in front of her. The green light came on. Yes, the crowd erupted again. Ed, Daniel closed his eyes for half a second. Ed, when he opened them, Ed, he looked immediately at Sophie, still standing on her seat. Ed, still waving the sign. Ed, her face open and brilliant with the specific joy of a child whose faith in her father has been publicly confirmed. Ed, he walked off stage on the left side, and the applause followed him all the way to the wings. Ed, Keely was there with a bottle of water and a look on her face that suggested she had seen a lot of auditions and this one had done something to her. Ed, Mr. Carter, she said. Daniel, he said. Daniel. She handed him the water. Ed, that was something. He opened the water and drank half of it. Ed, from backstage he could hear the host announcing the next audition. Ed, the show moved on. That was the nature of it. The constant forward motion, the next performer already waiting in the wings. Ed, the machine didn't pause for moments, it just kept running. Ed, but Daniel stood in the backstage corridor for a minute and let himself feel it. Ed, not the applause, not the votes, not the note even. Ed, the feeling of having sung. After 11 years of singing alone in a small kitchen while his daughter slept. After a decade of believing that the version of himself who stood on stages and moved rooms was a version that had died alongside his wife. After all of that, he had stood in front of 2,000 people and been heard. Ed, he hadn't known how much he needed that until it happened. Ed, he pressed his back against the wall, closed his eyes. Ed, the corridor was noisy, crew members passing, the distant sound of the crowd, a monitor playing the feed from the main stage. Ed, but inside that noise he found a moment of quiet, a pair of small arms wrapped around his waist from below. Ed, he didn't need to look. He put his hand on the top of Sophie's head. Ed, Daddy, she said into his jacket. Hey, you were incredible. Ed, you think so? She pulled back and looked up at him. Ed, her braids had come almost completely undone. She had the signs of recent crying around her eyes that she was absolutely not going to acknowledge, because Sophie Carter did not believe in acknowledging things that made her look anything other than confident. Ed, Keely said I had to stay in the family section, she said. Ed, you did. I didn't agree with that, I know, but I stayed. Ed, I know. Ed, she looked up at him with her mother's eyes. Ed, and in the noise and chaos of the backstage corridor of a major television studio. Ed, she said. Ed, Mom would have loved that. Ed, he looked at her for a long moment, his throat tightened. Ed, just once. Then he swallowed it down, the way he'd learned to do over 11 years of single mornings and school pickups and dinner tables built for 4 that now seated 2. Ed, yeah, he said, she would have. Sophie nodded, satisfied. Ed, she slipped her hand into his. Ed, which was something she only did in private. She was 8, and had opinions about public displays of affection, and they stood there together, Ed, the mechanic, and his daughter, Ed, while the show went on around them. Ed, what neither of them knew yet was that in the parking lot behind the studio, someone was already on a phone call. Ed, and in an office in Nashville, a television was on. Ed, and on the monitors in the production truck outside, someone had pulled up the feed from the audition and was watching the note, specifically the note on a loop. Ed, and Victoria Lane, Ed, still at the judge's table on the other side of that wall. Ed was sitting very still with a glass of water she hadn't touched. Ed, watching the next contestant walk out. Ed, and thinking about something she wasn't ready to say out loud yet. Ed, not tonight. But the thought was already there, and some thoughts, once they arrive, cannot be sent back. Ed, Daniel was back at work by 6:15 the next morning. Ed, he had not slept particularly well, not because he was anxious, though there was some of that, but because the apartment had been unusually loud until almost midnight. Ed, Sophie had been too wound up to sleep. Ed, talking at rapid speed about every moment of the evening in the specific and exhausting detail that only an 8-year-old can sustain. Ed, replaying his performance beat by beat. Ed, imitating Victoria's expression when the note landed, standing on the couch to demonstrate what she looked like, holding her sign above her head. Ed, he had finally gotten her settled at 11:30, sitting on the edge of her bed in the dark until her breathing slowed and the words running out of her became quieter and then stopped entirely. Ed, he'd washed the dishes, checked the door lock, sat at the kitchen table for a few minutes in the silence that a father earns after his child finally sleeps. Then he'd gone to bed and stared at the ceiling and thought, with a kind of quiet wonderment, about what had happened that evening. Ed, not the applause, not even the note. Just the feeling, that particular unlocking sensation of something long closed finally opening. Ed, then the alarm went off at 4:47 and he was Daniel Carter again. Mechanic, packed lunch, drove to work. Ed, his phone started at 7:03. He was in the service shaft of a hotel elevator on Wacker Drive when it went off the first time. Ed, he ignored it. He was in the middle of a brake calibration, and you did not stop mid-calibration for a phone call. Ed, the phone went quiet. Then it went off again. Then a third time, which was the number that meant something might actually require his attention. Ed, he finished the calibration, set his tool down, and checked the screen. Ed, 11 missed calls, 7 from numbers he didn't recognize. Ed, 2 from his sister Linda in Indianapolis, 1 from Roger, his foreman. Ed, 1 from Sophie's after-school program, which made his heart spike for a half-second before he remembered that Sophie was at school, and school didn't start for another 20 minutes, which meant this was probably not an emergency. Ed, he called Linda first. She picked up before the first ring finished. Ed, oh my God, Daniel. Good morning to you too. Are you serious right now? Good morning? Daniel, you are all over the internet. Ed, he was quiet for a moment. He'd known this was a possibility. The producer Whitfield had mentioned something about the digital reach of the show, the way clips spread, the standard language of a television production trying to manage expectations. Ed, he had not fully absorbed what that meant in practical terms. Ed, what do you mean all over? He said. I mean, I woke up this morning and my phone had 47 notifications because people I went to high school with were tagging me in a video of my brother hitting a high C on national television. A pause. Ed, her voice shifted from excited to something more careful. Danny, it has 4 million views. He sat very still inside the elevator shaft. Ed, it's been 8 hours, he said. 4 million views, she repeated. Ed, and it's still going. I checked 10 minutes ago. It was at 3.8. Ed, the comments, Daniel. I've been reading the comments all morning, and I'm going to be honest with you. I've cried 3 times. Ed, he didn't say anything. Are you okay? Linda asked. Ed, I'm in an elevator shaft, he said. That's not what I asked. Ed, he thought about it. I think so, he said. Yeah. Ed, I think I am. He could hear her exhale, the specific exhale of an older sister who has been worried about her younger brother for a long time and is only now beginning to let some of that worry go. Ed, you sound like yourself, she said. I am myself. Ed, I know. She stopped, started again. Ed, Mama called me last night after she saw the clip. Ed, she was crying so hard I could barely understand her. Ed, she kept saying she heard Marcus's voice in you. You know how she always said you had Daddy's voice, but last night she said she heard Marcus. Ed, Marcus was their father. He had died when Daniel was 19. Ed, he had been a deacon at Greater Hope Baptist Church, and his voice had been the thing people talked about for years after he was gone. It was the reason Daniel had first stood at a microphone. It was the inheritance that had nothing to do with money. Daniel pressed his back against the wall of the shaft. Tell Mama I'll call her tonight, he said. She'll want to talk for 2 hours. I know. A pause. Daniel, I'm proud of you. I've been saying for 15 years that you were wasting. I'm not going to say it like that. I'm just going to say I'm proud of you. And I think Rachel would have been absolutely beside herself. Rachel, his wife, Sophie's mother. The reason he sang Heaven's Door and the reason he had stopped singing it for 11 years until last night. Yeah, he said quietly. She would have. After he hung up with Linda, he called Roger. You're famous, Roger said without preamble. I'm an elevator mechanic. You're a famous elevator mechanic. There's a difference. Roger's voice had a grin in it, which was unusual because Roger was not a man who grinned easily. I had 3 guys come up to me this morning asking if the Daniel Carter who sang on TV was our Daniel Carter. I told them yes. I may have taken some credit for discovering you. Roger, I told them I always knew you had it. I'm very supportive. You didn't know I could sing. I know that. You know that. But they don't know that, and honestly at this point I feel like I've earned a little goodwill, a beat. Listen, I'm going to need you on the north side by 9. The Harrington building elevator has been giving trouble since Tuesday, and the building manager called me twice yesterday. Fame doesn't fix elevators. Fame doesn't fix elevators, Daniel agreed. I'll be there at 9. He hung up and looked at his phone for a moment. 31 notifications on his social media accounts he barely used, that Sophie had set up for him 2 years ago because she said everyone needed to have them, and that he had last checked sometime in March. He put the phone in his pocket. He had an elevator to finish. By the time he got to the Harrington building at 5 minutes to 9, the number on the clip had crossed 5 million. He knew this because the doorman at the Harrington, a man named Gerald who had been working that door for 11 years, and had said maybe 40 words to Daniel across all of them, stopped him at the entrance. Looked at him for a long moment, and said, that was you, wasn't it? It was, Daniel said. Gerald nodded slowly. He held out his hand. Daniel shook it. My wife cried, Gerald said. She doesn't cry at anything. Then Gerald held the door open and Daniel went in to fix the elevator. At noon his phone rang with a number he didn't recognize, a Nashville area code. He almost didn't answer. He was eating his lunch on the loading dock, same as always, and the morning had already brought more phone calls than he typically received in a month. But something made him pick up. Mr. Carter? My name is Sylvia Park. I'm the executive director of Meridian Records. A pause to let that land. I know you've probably had an unusual morning. I'll keep this short because I imagine you're getting calls from a lot of people right now, and I want to be respectful of your time. We would like to meet with you. At your convenience, your schedule, no pressure, no performance. Just a conversation. We believe you have something we don't encounter often. Daniel ate a chip. What's that? A voice people trust, she said. He was quiet for a moment. I fix elevators, he said. I know, Sylvia said. That's partly why I'm calling. He told her he would think about it. He took her number. He hung up and finished his lunch. Then he drove to his next job and tried to feel like himself inside a day that seemed increasingly determined to be about someone else. He picked Sophie up at 5:30. She came out of the after-school building in a controlled sprint that she was pretending was a regular walk, and she had the specific expression of a child who has been holding information in all day and is about to let it out at high velocity. Dad, she said before she was fully in the car. Seatbelt, he said. She clicked it. Dad. Ms. Alvarez showed the clip in class today. He looked at her. She did what? She showed the whole class. On the projector. Everyone saw it. And Marcus, he's this kid who never talks to me. He came up to me at lunch and said, your dad's voice is insane. And I said, I know. Daniel pulled out of the parking lot. Your teacher showed the clip. To the whole class, Sophie confirmed. And then she made us write a paragraph about it for language arts. The prompt was, what does courage look like? She didn't tell me that was the prompt, by the way. I found out when I sat down and had to write about my own dad for homework. That was great, Sophie said firmly. I wrote the best paragraph I have ever written in my life. I wrote about how you stood there when that woman laughed at you, And you didn't move, and you didn't say anything rude, and then you just sang. Ed, I wrote that courage isn't being loud, it's being still when everyone expects you to break. She paused. Ed, Ms. Alvarez is going to read it to the class tomorrow. Ed, he kept his eyes on the road. Sophie, he said, yeah? Ed, you know I'm still just your dad, right? Nothing changed. Ed, she looked at him, 8 years old, with the direct gaze she'd had since she was 3, the one that made adults feel they were being assessed. Ed, you're still my dad, she said. That doesn't mean nothing changed. Ed, he had no answer for that. That night, after Sophie was in bed, Daniel sat at the kitchen table and did what he had avoided doing all day. Ed, he opened his laptop and pulled up the clip. He watched himself walk out onto that stage. Ed, he watched himself stand still under Victoria's comments. Ed, he'd known at the time that he wasn't reacting. It hadn't felt like restraint, exactly. More like the comments were simply not as large as what he was carrying. Ed, but watching it from the outside, he understood what other people were seeing. Ed, a man who had survived things that made public mockery feel small. Ed, not because he was trying to project strength, but because he genuinely had a different frame of reference for what hard felt like. Ed, he watched the note. He watched his own face during the note, eyes slightly closed, shoulders dropped, the complete physical absence of effort that made no sense for a note that difficult. Ed, he looked, he thought, like a man singing a lullaby. Ed, quiet, private, as if the theater were empty. He watched Victoria's face. Ed, he paused the clip there, sat with it. Her expression in that frozen frame was not something a casual viewer would spend time analyzing. Ed, most people were looking at Daniel. But Daniel looked at Victoria, and he saw something he hadn't noticed from the stage, because from the stage he hadn't been looking at her. Ed, he'd been looking at Sophie. What he saw in Victoria Lane's face, frozen in the moment after the note ended, was not contempt. Ed, it was recognition. The particular expression of someone who has just heard a thing they know how to hear, and heard it at a level they were not expecting, Ed, and are now grappling privately with what that means for the careful architecture of everything they have believed about themselves. Ed, he'd seen that expression before, not on a judge, not on a famous singer. Ed, on himself. In the bathroom mirror, the morning after he'd heard his daughter's voice note and realized she had submitted his name without telling him. Ed, the expression of someone who has been shown something they cannot unsee. Ed, he closed the laptop. He made himself a cup of tea. Ed, he sat with it. His phone buzzed, a text from a number he didn't recognize, and he was about to ignore it when he saw the message. Ed, it read, Mr. Carter, this is Victoria Lane. I obtained your number through the show's production team. Ed, I apologize for the late hour. I would like to speak with you privately when you have time. Ed, it's not for the press. I need to say something to you that I wasn't able to say in front of the cameras. Ed, please respond when you're comfortable. I'll wait. Ed, he read it twice. Then he set his phone face down on the table. Ed, he sat in the quiet kitchen. The faucet dripped its metronome drip. Ed. The city moved outside the window the way it always moved, indifferent and continuous and entirely unchanged by the fact that Daniel Carter had hit a high C in front of 11 million people the night before. He did not text back that night. He went to bed. He set the alarm for 4:47. Ed, he closed his eyes. Ed. But he lay awake for a while, thinking about an expression frozen on a screen, the expression of recognition, and about what a woman with 5 Grammy Awards could possibly need to say to him that she couldn't say in front of cameras. Ed, 3 days passed. In those 3 days, the clip crossed 12 million views. Ed. A music journalist at Rolling Stone wrote a piece with the headline, The Mechanic Who Sang Victoria Lane Better Than Victoria Lane. The headline spread faster than the article. Ed, Victoria's team issued a statement saying the headline was sensationalist and unfair to a professional artist. Ed, the statement generated more coverage than the article had. Ed, on Thursday morning, Daniel was in the break room at a building on the north side when Marcus Webb's assistant called to invite him to a meeting at Webb's Chicago office. Ed, the same afternoon Sylvia Park called again from Nashville. Ed, that evening a producer from a competing television network left a voicemail. Ed, he listened to none of them back to back. He responded to none of them that day. Ed, he went home. Ed, he made dinner. Ed, he helped Sophie with her math homework. Ed, he watched 20 minutes of television with her before she fell asleep on the couch. Ed, and he carried her to bed. Ed, then he sat down and replied to Victoria Lane's text. Ed, he typed, I can talk. Tell me when. She responded in 4 minutes. Ed, tomorrow, noon. There's a coffee place on Wabash called Cotter's. Ed, I'll be in the back. He typed, I'll be there. He put the phone down. He sat for a moment with a strange particular feeling of a life that is changing faster than the man living it can fully absorb. Ed, he was the same person who had packed that lunch at 5 in the morning, who had written, "You are braver than you think" on a folded note, who had stood in a doorway and looked at his sleeping daughter, because doing so kept him straight. Ed, he was the same person. But the world had started to look at him differently, and he was beginning to understand that those two things, being the same and being seen differently, could both be true at once. Ed, and navigating the distance between them was going to require something from him that he hadn't yet figured out how to name. Ed, he got up, rinsed his cup, and went to bed. The next morning he was at the Meridian Tower by 6. Ed, Elevator 4 was slipping again, the same relay, the same pattern of failure, the same temporary fix that management kept approving, instead of the permanent solution he kept recommending. Ed, he wrote it up again with the same language he'd used the last 2 times. Ed, added the date. Ed, added a note that said this unit requires full relay replacement. Ed, not calibration. Ed, and signed his name. Ed, he didn't expect them to listen, but he wrote it down because that was the job. Ed, you wrote down what was true even when no one was acting on it. Ed, you kept the record, you kept showing up. By 11:45 he was cleaned up, not dressed up, just clean, and he was standing outside Cotter's on Wabash, looking at the door. Ed, a couple walked out. A businessman with a laptop bag walked in. Ed, through the window he could see the back corner of the coffee shop. Ed, and in that corner, Ed, at a small table. Ed, a woman was sitting alone with 2 coffee cups in front of her. Ed, facing the door. Ed, Victoria Lane was not in her stage makeup. She was not wearing the kind of clothes she wore on television. Ed, she looked like a person, which sounds like a small thing. Ed, but it wasn't. Ed, because every image of Victoria Lane that existed in the public mind was managed and curated and produced. Ed, and the woman sitting in the back corner of Cotter's coffee shop looked simply like a woman in her 40s who hadn't slept well in several days. Ed, she was watching the door. She saw him through the glass. Ed, she didn't smile or wave. She held his gaze for a moment, then looked down at her coffee. Ed, he pushed the door open and went in. He walked to the back. Ed sat down across from her. She looked at him directly, the way she'd looked at him from the judge's table, but without the camera in between them now. Without the audience, without the production value of the show. Ed, just 2 people at a table. Thank you for coming, she said. Ed, sure, he said. A short silence. The coffee shop moved around them, the hiss of the espresso machine, the low conversation of other tables, the door opening behind them. Ed, neither of them touched their cups. I need to ask you something first, Victoria said. Ed, and I need you to answer me honestly. All right, Daniel said. Ed, when you chose that song, my song, did you do it to challenge me? Because the show producer suggested it, or because you wanted to make a point, or because you thought... Ed, my daughter loves it, Daniel said. She stopped. That's it, he said. Ed, Sophie asked me to sing it for her birthday when she turned 6. Ed, I've sung it at home probably 200 times. It's her song. Ed, it just happens to be yours too. Victoria looked at him for a long moment. Then something moved through her face, not the camera-ready emotion of a performer, but a smaller, quieter thing. Ed, the kind of thing that happens in a person's face when they've been bracing for one kind of conversation and received a completely different one. Ed, okay, she said. Okay, he said. I believe you. She looked down. Ed turned her coffee cup slightly on the table. I need to tell you something. Ed, and I want to be clear that I am not saying this because of the press, or because my team suggested I make a public gesture. Ed, or because of the article in Rolling Stone, which I want on record I think was deeply unfair to me, and I will say that to you directly. Ed, all right, he said. What I said to you on that stage. She stopped. Ed started again. When I said some dreams are better left as dreams. Ed, was a pause, a very uncharacteristic pause for a woman whose public persona was built on never losing her footing. Ed, that was wrong of me. I looked at you and I decided what you were before you opened your mouth. Ed, and that is exactly the thing I have spent my career telling other people not to do. Ed, the coffee shop moved around them. I know why I did it, she said. Ed, I know the psychology of it. I've been doing this long enough that when someone walks on that stage who doesn't fit the template, I have a trained response. Ed, manage the expectation, soften the landing. It protects the audience from disappointment, and it protects the show from moments like the one that happened. She looked up at him. Ed, except that what happened was not a disappointment. Ed, and I was the only person in that room who didn't immediately understand that. Ed, Daniel looked at her. I voted yes, she said. Ed, and I'm sitting here telling you that I almost didn't. Ed, he absorbed that. Almost, he said. Almost, she confirmed. Ed, and the fact that it was almost the fact that I sat there in that moment and had to override something in me to press that button that has been sitting in my chest for 3 days, and I needed to say it to you. Ed, directly, without cameras, because you deserved that. Silence. Daniel looked down at his coffee. He picked it up. Ed drank some. It was good coffee. Can I ask you something, he said. Ed, please, she said, when the note ended, just after. Ed, what were you thinking? She was quiet for a moment. Ed, she looked at the table. When she looked back up, her voice was level, but there was something careful in it, the voice of someone handling something fragile. Ed, I was thinking, she said slowly, that I have sung that note 1,000 times. Ed, I have sung it in studios and on stages in 40 countries. Ed, I have sung it with orchestras and in empty rooms for sound checks at 2 in the morning. She paused. Ed, and you sang it like it cost you something real. Not technically, it was extraordinary, and I will not diminish that. Ed, but it was what was behind it. You sang it like the note was the only container you had for something too large to carry any other way. Ed, she stopped. He looked at her. That's exactly what it was, he said quietly. Ed, she nodded, once, as if that confirmed something she had already known and had been hoping he would say anyway. Ed, I know, she said, I recognized it. Ed, I recognized it because it's the thing I've been trying to find in my own voice for the last 4 years, and I haven't been able to locate it. And then you walked out in that suit and fuped in 30 seconds, in front of 11 million people. Ed, the espresso machine hissed. A child at the next table dropped something and laughed. Ed, that's why I almost didn't press the button, Victoria said. Ed, not because you weren't good enough. Because you were too much of what I needed to see and I wasn't ready. Ed, Daniel sat with that for a moment. It was one of the more honest things anyone had said to him in a long time, and he'd spent the last 3 days in a river of people saying things to him. Ed, I appreciate you telling me that, he said. I'm going to say something publicly, she said. And I want you to know before I do, not a statement from my team me. Ed, because the right thing is to say it where the wrong thing was said. Ed, he looked at her. He thought about the woman in the 8th row with her hand over her mouth. Ed, the teenager who put his phone in his pocket. Gerald the doorman whose wife never cried at anything. Ed, his sister Linda crying 3 times reading comments. Ed, Sophie standing on her seat with a cardboard sign. You don't owe me anything, he said. No, Victoria agreed. Ed, but I owe myself the correction. He nodded. Okay, he said. Ed, she exhaled. For a moment, just a moment, she looked not like a Grammy-winning star, and not like the woman who had almost not pressed a button, and not like a public figure managing a narrative. Ed, she looked like a person who had done something she wasn't proud of, and was trying to do the next right thing. Ed, he understood that feeling completely. He'd lived it, in various forms, for 11 years. Ed, my daughter still loves your song, he said. She looked at him. Ed, a small thing crossed her face, not quite a smile, but close to it. Ed, that might be the nicest thing anyone said to me this week, she said. Ed, he finished his coffee, set the cup down. He had a job at 2 on the south side, and he needed to call Sylvia Park back before the end of the day because that conversation had been waiting long enough. Ed. But for a moment he sat at the back table of Cotter's on Wabash, across from one of the most famous voices in America, and felt something he hadn't felt since the night of the audition, that particular unlocking sensation. Ed. Not pride, not vindication, just the simple solid feeling of something being resolved. Ed, he stood and picked up his jacket. I'll be listening, he said. Ed, she looked up at him. When you say whatever you're going to say, he clarified. Ed, I'll be paying attention. Victoria Lane held his gaze. Ed, so will I, she said. When you sing again. He put on his jacket. Ed walked out of the coffee shop into the noise of Wabash Avenue. Ed, his phone was already buzzing in his pocket. The world had questions. Ed, it had offers and opportunities and requests and headlines waiting to be written. Ed, it had the momentum of 12 million views, and the Rolling Stone article, and the calls from Nashville, and the meeting Marcus Webb wanted to have, and the statement Victoria was going to make. Ed, all of that was coming. But walking out of Cotter's, Daniel Carter allowed himself a single quiet thought, the kind of thought a man earns after 11 years of 5 a.m. Ed, alarms and packed lunches and elevator shafts, and keeping himself pointed in the right direction through the long, difficult work of loving someone who depended entirely on him. He thought Sophie is going to lose her mind when she hears about this. And he smiled alone on the sidewalk, heading to his truck. Sophie did lose her mind. He told her that evening over dinner, just the broad strokes, just that he had met with Victoria Lane privately and that it had gone well. He left out the specifics because some conversations were not his to share and some moments needed to stay where they happened. But he told her enough, and Sophie put down her fork and stared at him with the expression of someone receiving information that is actively reorganizing their understanding of how the world works. She called you, Sophie said. She texted first. Then we met for coffee. Victoria Lane texted my dad, that's correct. Sophie picked her fork back up. It back down. And she apologized? She said what she needed to say, yeah. What did you say? I told her you still love her song. Sophie stared at him. That's what you said? That's your response to a Grammy winner apologizing to you? You told her I like her music? I thought it was the right thing to say. Dad. She said his name the way his mother used to say it, 2 letters carrying the full weight of a person's exasperation. You could have said anything. You could have said, I don't know, something powerful. Something people would quote. I'm not trying to be quoted, he said. I'm trying to be decent. Sophie looked at him for a long moment. Then she picked up her fork and ate a piece of broccoli, which was something she only did when she was processing something too large for words. Okay, she said finally. That's actually pretty good. Thank you. I still think you should have something quotable. He smiled. Eat your dinner. The next morning, Victoria Lane posted on her social media. No statement from her team, no carefully worded press release. Just a video, 90 seconds. No makeup. Sitting in what looked like a kitchen, talking directly into a camera. She said, I made a mistake on Tuesday night. I looked at a man and decided what he was before he had the chance to show me. I used my position on that stage to make him feel small before he sang a single note. I was wrong to do that, and I want to say so directly. Publicly. In the same place where the original moment happened, in front of people. Daniel Carter is an extraordinary singer. But more than that, he is the kind of person this industry forgets exists, who carries everything quietly and asks for nothing. I judged him. He outclassed me, not just vocally, in every way that matters. The video was 43 seconds long. It got 7 million views by noon. Daniel saw it at 7:15 in the morning. Standing in the break room at the Meridian Tower. Coffee in hand. Phone propped against his lunch bag. He watched it twice. Then he put his phone in his pocket and finished his coffee and went to work. Roger found him in the shaft of elevator 4 at 8:30. You've seen it, Roger said. It wasn't a question. I've seen it, Daniel confirmed. My wife cried again. That's twice in 1 week. I haven't made my wife cry in 11 years, and this situation has done it twice. I'll apologize to her. Don't you dare. She's thrilled. Roger leaned against the wall. He was a big man, wide through the shoulders, the kind of foreman who had come up through the trades and retained the physical presence of someone who'd spent 30 years lifting things. He crossed his arms and looked at Daniel with an expression that Daniel had never quite seen on his face before. Something careful. Considering, I need to ask you something. All right, Daniel said. And I need you to answer me straight, not the way you answer when you're trying to make everyone comfortable. All right, Daniel said again. Are you going to leave? The shaft was quiet for a moment, just the mechanical breathing of the building around them. I haven't decided anything, Daniel said. That's not a no. No, Daniel agreed, it's not a no. Roger was quiet. He looked at his boots, then he looked back up at Daniel. You're the best mechanic I have, he said. You know these buildings the way most people know their own houses. I'm not going to pretend that's nothing. He paused. But I also need you to hear me say something, and I need you to let me finish before you respond. I'm listening, Daniel said. I've known you for 9 years. I've worked beside you through Rachel dying and through Sophie's first year and through every broken elevator in downtown Chicago. And I have listened to you come in here every morning and do your job, and do it well, and never once say anything about the other thing. He paused. The voice thing. I didn't know you could sing. In 9 years you never mentioned it. Not once. Daniel was quiet. That's a long time to carry something without putting it down anywhere, Roger said. Ed, a long time. He uncrossed his arms. I'm not telling you to leave. Ed, I'm telling you that if this goes where I think it might be going, I'm not going to be the reason you didn't say yes. He held out his hand. Ed, you understand me? Daniel looked at his foreman's hand. Ed, he shook it. I'll let you know what I decide, Daniel said. Ed, you do that, Roger said. He pushed off the wall and headed toward the door of the shaft. Ed. He stopped. Ed, without turning around, he said, Ed, for the record, Ed, I told my wife I knew you had it all along. Ed, I'm sticking to that story. I'll back you up, Daniel said. Ed, Roger left. Daniel stood alone in the shaft and listened to the building breathe. Ed, he had a meeting with Marcus Webb at 2 o'clock. He had a call scheduled with Sylvia Park at 4:30. He had a voicemail from James Whitfield at the show, saying that the producers wanted to discuss a featured performance slot, something larger than the audition, something that would be built around Daniel specifically. Ed, and he had, tucked in the back of his mind where he was trying not to touch it yet, a conversation he needed to have with Sophie. Ed, because everything that was happening was going to affect her in ways he hadn't fully mapped, and she was 8 years old, and she deserved to have a father who made decisions with her in mind, rather than making them and then asking her to adjust. Ed, he finished the work on Elevator 4, wrote it up again. Same language, relay replacement, not calibration. Ed signed his name. Then he cleaned his hands and drove to his 2 o'clock. Ed, Marcus Webb's Chicago office was on the 14th floor of a building Daniel had never been inside as anything other than a mechanic. The elevator was a newer model, smooth. Ed, well-maintained. Ed, no slippage. Ed, correctly calibrated. Ed, Daniel noticed this automatically, the way people notice things in their own language. Ed, he wrote it up and thought about what a strange week it had been. Ed, Marcus met him at the door himself, which Daniel had not expected. Ed, he'd anticipated an assistant, a waiting room, the usual architecture of importance. Ed. Instead, the door opened, and Marcus Webb was standing there in a flannel shirt with his sleeves rolled up, looking less like a record industry titan and more like a man who'd been on the phone all morning. Ed, Daniel Carter, Marcus said. He said it the way he'd said it on the judges' panel with the weight of genuine feeling. Ed, come in. Thank you for making time. Thank you for the invitation, Daniel said. The office was large but not showy. Books, a whiteboard with names and dates written on it in marker. Ed, a desk with 2 phones, both with messages waiting. Ed. Marcus gestured toward a sitting area with 2 chairs and a low table, and they sat, and an assistant materialized briefly to put water on the table and then disappeared. Ed. Marcus leaned forward with his elbows on his knees. Ed. He was a man in his early 60s, gray in his beard, with the kind of eyes that had been paying close attention to people for a very long time. Ed. I'm going to be straightforward with you, Marcus said, because I think you're a man who prefers that. Ed, I do, Daniel confirmed. I've been in this business for 34 years. Ed, I've signed artists at every level, kids fresh out of high school, legends at the end of long careers, everyone in between. Ed, I've heard a lot of voices. He paused. What I heard Tuesday night was not a singing voice. Ed, it was a storytelling voice. There is a meaningful difference. Ed, people with singing voices can be trained. What you have can't be manufactured. Ed, it comes from the inside or it doesn't come at all. Daniel held his gaze. I want to record with you, Marcus said. Ed, I don't want to turn you into something you're not. Ed, I don't want to process you or brand you or position you as a narrative, the single dad, the mechanic, the redemption story. Ed, the press is going to do all of that without any of our help. He paused. Ed, what I want to do is very simple. I want to put a microphone in front of you and let you sing. Ed, and I want to help what comes out reach the people it's supposed to reach. Ed, Daniel looked at the water on the table. He picked it up. Ed, took a sip. What does that look like practically, he said. Ed, studio time in Chicago. I don't want to uproot you. Ed, your daughter is here. Your life is here. We come to you. To 8 songs to start. Your choices, your tempo. Ed, we don't rush it and we don't force it. If after 6 months it's not working for either of us, we shake hands and you go back to whatever you decide you want to go back to. Ed, and if it works, then we talk about what the next chapter looks like. Ed, together, with you holding the pen, Marcus paused. Ed, I've made a career out of working with artists who know what they want to say. Ed, I haven't had a conversation like that in a few years, honestly. Ed, I think you know exactly what you want to say. I think Tuesday night was the first said it in a room large enough to hear it, and that's not going to go away. Ed, Daniel was quiet for a moment. My daughter has school, he said. Ed, and I need to be the one picking her up. Non-negotiable, Marcus said without hesitating. Ed, I mean that. I don't want you absent from your life. Ed, that's not the version of this I'm interested in. Ed, I have a job, Daniel said. I haven't decided what I'm doing about that yet. Ed, take your time, Marcus said. That decision doesn't need to be made today. Ed, the show wants a featured performance, Daniel said. Ed Whitfield called. Marcus nodded. I think you should do it. Ed, not because of the exposure, though. The exposure is significant, but because I think you have one more thing to say in that room. Ed, something you didn't finish Tuesday. Daniel looked at him. Ed, what do you mean? Tuesday you walked out as a surprise. Ed, an unknown quantity. The audience didn't know what to expect from you, which was partly why the reaction was what it was. Marcus leaned back. Ed, if you go back knowing what you know now, with what's happened in the last 3 days behind you, you walk out as something different. Ed, as someone who has already been tested and stood, that's a different performance. Ed, a different energy. He paused. I think the song you sing the second time tells us more about who you really are than the first one did. Ed, Daniel thought about that. He thought about Elevator 4 and the relay that management kept refusing to replace. He thought about the note he'd written the same words on 3 separate occasions. Relay replacement, not calibration. Ed. He thought about how there was a right solution and a temporary solution, and he had always known the difference, and the difference had always mattered to him, even when no one was listening. Ed, I'll think about the performance, he said. That's all I'm asking, Marcus said. Ed, he stood. They shook hands. Marcus held the grip for a moment. Ed, one more thing, off the record, just between us. Ed, all right, Daniel said. I've never done this in 34 years. Marcus looked at him directly. Ed, I drove to a coffee shop this morning, and I sat there for 20 minutes trying to figure out how to tell my wife something I hadn't told anyone. Ed, and the thing was, I realized I'd been talking about money and percentages and market positioning in my head, the way I always do. Ed, and underneath all of it, I wanted to work with you, because what you did Tuesday night reminded me of why I got into this in the first place. He paused. Ed, that doesn't happen anymore. Not like that, not like Tuesday. Ed, Daniel absorbed that. I'll be in touch, he said. Ed, he rode the elevator down alone. The call with Sylvia Park at 4:30 lasted 40 minutes. Ed, she was direct. Ed, intelligent. Ed, and did not once attempt to manage him. Ed, which he appreciated. Ed, she talked about distribution and creative control, and what her label had done with 3 other artists who had come from outside the traditional industry pipeline. Ed, she was honest about the commercial pressures and honest about what she couldn't control. Ed, she said, at one point, I'm not going to tell you this is simple. Ed, it isn't. But I will tell you that the artists I've worked with who came in knowing exactly who they were, knowing what they were not willing to become, those are the ones who are still making music 10 years later on their own terms. Ed, what about the ones who didn't know? Daniel asked. Ed, they made a lot of money for a short time, Sylvia said, and then they lost something they couldn't get back. Ed, he thanked her and said he'd follow up by the end of the week. Ed, he picked Sophie up at 5:30, same as always. Ed, she got in the car, clicked her seatbelt, and looked at him with the expression of someone who had been exercising tremendous patience all day. Ed, how did the meetings go? She said. Good, he said. Both of them, and I'm thinking, he said. Ed, about what? About what I want to do. Sophie looked out the windshield. Ed, Dad, can I say something always? I know you're going to tell me that whatever you decide is about what's best for us. Ed, for me, she paused, and I know you believe that. Ed, but I want you to know something. What's that? Ed. She turned and looked at him the way she sometimes did, direct. Ed, unguarded. Ed, without the performance of childhood. Ed, just the actual person she was becoming. Ed, I don't need you to sacrifice the thing, she said. Ed, I need you to show me that the thing is possible. Ed, those are different. She turned back to the windshield. Ed, Ms. Alvarez said the best thing a parent can do is live in a way that shows their kid what a real life looks like. Ed, not a perfect one, a real one. He drove for a moment in silence. Ed, when did you get this smart? He said. I've always been this smart, she said. Ed, you just haven't had time to notice, he laughed. Ed, a real one. And she smiled, looking out the window, pretending she hadn't been hoping to make him laugh. Ed, that evening, Ed, after dinner, Ed, after homework, Ed, after the bath and the braids that he was getting marginally better at, Ed, after the book they read together the way they had every night since Sophie was 3 that evening, Ed, after all of it, Daniel sat at the kitchen table with a blank piece of paper and a pen. Not a contract, not a decision document, just a piece of he wrote Rachel's name at the top. He did this sometimes when he needed to think clearly about something that mattered. It wasn't a ritual exactly, more a habit of orientation. A way of asking himself whether the decision he was making was the kind she would have recognized as his. He sat with the paper for a while. He thought about what Marcus had said, that Tuesday was the first time he'd said something in a room large enough to hear it. He thought about what Sophie had said in the car, with the directness that was entirely her own, that she needed him to show her the thing was possible, not to sacrifice it. He thought about the relay in elevator 4 that kept failing because the right solution was being deferred in favor of the temporary one. He thought about 9 years of 5 a.m. alarms and packed lunches and a singing voice that he had kept entirely inside the walls of a small apartment on the north side of Chicago. He thought about 7.5 seconds and what it felt like to hold something that long and not break. He wrote 2 words under Rachel's name. Then he folded the paper and put it in the kitchen drawer where he kept the important things: Sophie's birth certificate, their insurance cards, the letter he'd written Rachel the night before she died that he'd never opened since. He went to bed. The alarm went off at 4:47. He sat on the edge of the mattress in the dark, 60 seconds. He counted them the way he always did, silence before the day. But something was different this morning. Not the apartment was the same. Not the city outside the city was the same. The difference was internal and small and very specific. For the first time in 11 years, when the 60 seconds ended and he stood up, he felt like he was standing towards something, rather than simply away from falling. He couldn't have said when that changed, but it had. He got dressed. He made Sophie's lunch, peanut butter and strawberry jam on wheat. Triangles. He added the pretzels, the juice box, and the note. This morning he wrote 4 words: "It is already possible." He set it by the door. He started the coffee. His phone buzzed. A text from James Whitfield. It said, "The featured performance is scheduled for 3 weeks out. Prime slot. The show is building the segment around you. We need your song choice by Monday. Take your time this weekend. But Daniel, whatever you choose, make sure it's yours." He read the message twice. Then he opened his phone's contact list, scrolled to M and pressed call. Marcus Webb answered on the second ring. "Daniel." "I want to do the performance," Daniel said. "And I know what I want to sing." A pause on the line. "Tell me." "Not Heaven's Door," Daniel said. "Something I wrote a long time ago. I've never sung it for anyone." He stopped. "Sophie. And Rachel once before she got sick." "It's not finished. It's been sitting for 11 years." Marcus was quiet for a moment. When he spoke, his voice had something in it that wasn't there at the start of the call. "Finish it," he said. "You've got 3 weeks, I know," Daniel said. "Daniel, yeah, is it good?" Daniel thought about a kitchen table at 2 in the morning, and a woman with dark wild hair, and the particular way she used to go quiet when something moved her, not pulling away, but pulling in, leaning toward the thing that touched her. "It's the best thing I've ever written," he said. "I just wasn't ready to give it to the world yet." "What changed?" Marcus said. Daniel looked at the note on the counter. "The one by the lunch bag. 4 words. It is already possible." "My daughter," he said. Marcus Webb said nothing for a moment. And then quietly, in the voice of a man who had heard a great many things over 34 years and had learned to recognize the real ones, "Then finish it for her." Daniel said he would. He hung up. He poured his coffee. He stood at the kitchen counter in the early dark of a Thursday morning and drank it, the way he always did. The faucet dripped. The city began its preparations for the day outside the window. Somewhere down the hall, Sophie made the sound she made when she was shifting in her sleep but not waking up, a small sound. Barely audible. The sound of a child who felt safe enough to sleep deeply. He had 3 weeks. He had an unfinished song that had been sitting in a drawer for 11 years. He had a voice that 7.5 million people had heard, and that the woman who built her career on a single impossible note had told him sang like it was carrying something real. He had a daughter who needed him to show her that the thing was possible. And he had a kitchen table, and a pen, and all the early morning hours that a man earns when he is the first one awake in a house full of the people he loves. He set his cup down. He went to the drawer where he kept the important things. He reached past Sophie's birth certificate, past the insurance cards, past the letter he hadn't opened in 11 years. He pulled out the folded piece of paper. He took it to the table. He unfolded it. At the top, Rachel's name. Underneath it, the 2 words he had written before he went to bed. Not yet. He looked at those 2 words for a moment. Then he took his pen and crossed them out. He wrote 2 new words underneath. Right now. He turned to the blank space below and began to write. He wrote for 3 nights straight. Not all night. He still set the alarm for 4:47, still made the lunches. Still drove the routes and fixed the elevators, and wrote up elevator 4, for what was now the 4th time with the same language, relay replacement, not calibration. But after Sophie went to bed, after the apartment went quiet, and the only sound was the drip of the faucet and the low hum of the city outside, Daniel sat at the kitchen table with a piece of paper and the pen, and he finished the song. It wasn't a clean process. It wasn't inspiration arriving fully formed. It was a man sitting in the dark, crossing out lines and rewriting them and crossing them out again, humming quietly so he wouldn't wake Sophie. Testing phrases against the melody he'd carried in his head for 11 years like a photograph he'd never developed. Some nights he worked for 2 hours and threw away most of it. One night he worked for 40 minutes and kept everything. On the 4th night he sang it through from beginning to end for the first time. Just him at the kitchen table. Voice low. The empty apartment around him. When he finished, he sat quietly for a moment. Then he put the pen down and didn't pick it up again. It was done. He called Marcus the next morning from the parking lot outside the Meridian Tower before his shift started. It's finished, he said. How does it feel? Marcus asked. Daniel thought about it. Like putting something down that I've been carrying for a long time, he said. A pause. Can you sing it for me? Just over the phone, rough, so I know what we're working with before the studio session. No, Daniel said. Marcus was quiet for a beat, no? The first time I sing it for someone, I want it to matter, Daniel said. The phone doesn't matter enough. Another pause. Then Marcus said, okay. I respect that. His voice had the quality of a man who had just been reminded of something he'd forgotten. Studio is booked for next Thursday. We'll hear it then. Thursday, Daniel confirmed. He got out of the car and went to fix the elevators. The week moved the way weeks move when something large is waiting at the end of them, both faster and slower than it should. Hours that dragged, and then suddenly it was Thursday morning and Daniel was standing in the kitchen at 5 a.m. With his coffee and Sophie's lunch on the counter, and the piece of paper folded in the inside pocket of his jacket, next to his heart, the way he used to carry Rachel's letters when they were young and separated by distance. Sophie came into the kitchen at 7, still half asleep, hair everywhere. She saw the jacket, she saw his face. She woke up the rest of the way. Today's the day, she said. Today's the day, he confirmed. She sat down at the table. He put a bowl of cereal in front of her. She looked at it without eating. Are you nervous? She asked. A little. She looked up at him. Good, she said. That means you care about it. He looked at his daughter. 8 years old and already the wisest person he knew. Where did you get that? He said. Ms. Alvarez, she said. She picked up her spoon. She says nervousness is just caring without direction yet. He drank his coffee. I want to hear it, Sophie said. The new song. I know you haven't played it for anyone, but I want to be the first. You will be, he said, tonight when I get home. She held his gaze. Promise, he said. She nodded, satisfied, and ate her cereal. The studio Marcus had booked was a place on the near north side called Greenfield Sound, not a glamour operation, not the kind of place with gold records on the walls and famous names carved into every surface. It was working space, clean, honest, built for the business of making music rather than performing the idea of it. The engineer was a man named Pete, who was somewhere in his 50s and had the quiet efficiency of someone who had heard everything and was still capable of being surprised. Marcus was there when Daniel arrived. So was Diane Chen, which Daniel had not expected. She was standing with a cup of coffee and a small smile that didn't perform anything. I hope it's all right, Marcus said. Diane asked if she could be here for the first session. I told her it was your call. Daniel looked at Diane. You could have called and asked, he said. I know, she said. I was worried you'd say no. I might have, he admitted. I know that too, she said. Which is why I'm standing in the building instead of on the phone. She tilted her head. You can ask me to leave. He considered it for a moment. You can stay, he said. She exhaled. Thank you. Ed. Pete set up the microphone while they talked the positioning, the monitoring, the basic logistics of the session. Ed. He was matter-of-fact about all of it, treating Daniel the same way he would treat anyone who walked into his studio, which was exactly the right thing to do, and Daniel appreciated it deeply. Ed. Marcus sat on a stool near the back wall. Diane sat next to him. Ed. Pete went into the booth. Daniel stood at the microphone. Ed. He had not performed this song. He had not rehearsed it in front of mirrors, or run it for a vocal coach, or practiced projecting it into a large space. Ed. He had written it at a kitchen table, and sung it once in an empty apartment to make sure it held together. Ed. That was all. He reached into the inside pocket of his jacket and took out the piece of paper. Ed. He unfolded it. He set it on the stand in front of him, not because he needed the words, he had them memorized down to the breath marks, but because Rachel's name was written at the top of it, and he wanted her in the room. Ed. He looked at Marcus. Marcus. Daniel sang. No piano. Ed. No track, no arrangement. Just his voice in a clean acoustic space, the song moving through the air the way it had moved in his head for 11 years, finally given room to be full-sized. Ed. The song was about a man who lost the person who taught him to believe in himself, and who spent a decade convincing himself that the things she believed in didn't have to exist anymore just because she didn't. Ed. It was about an 8-year-old girl with her mother's eyes and her mother's hair who had filmed her father singing in a kitchen and sent the tape to strangers because she knew something her father had forgotten. Ed. It was about 5 a.m. alarms and packed lunches and a faucet that dripped and a suit from a sister's wedding and a note that said, "You are braver than you think." Ed. It was about a high C held for 7.5 seconds. Ed. And it was about the moment a man realizes that surviving and living are not the same thing, and that the people we love do not leave us their grief as an inheritance, they leave us their belief in us. Ed. And what we do with that is the only eulogy that matters. Ed. The song lasted 4 minutes and 12 seconds. When it ended, the studio was completely silent. Ed. Not the stunned silence of a crowd caught off guard. Ed. The deeper silence of people who have just been given something and don't want to put it down immediately. Ed. Pete's voice came through the monitor from the booth. Ed. He said nothing. Ed. He just played back the last 20 seconds of what he'd recorded. Ed. And the sound of Daniel's voice in the room, his voice singing about Sophie. Ed. About Rachel. Ed. About a life rebuilt from what the hard years left behind, filled the space again. Ed. Diane Chen pressed both hands to her face. Marcus was looking at the floor with his elbows on his knees, the way a man looks when he is trying to hold his composure and is not entirely succeeding. Ed. Daniel stood at the microphone with the piece of paper in his hands. Ed. Well, Pete said through the monitor, and his voice had something in it that it hadn't had when they started. Ed. I think we've got something. Marcus looked up. He cleared his throat. Ed. He looked at Daniel for a long moment. That's the first single, he said. Ed. That is the first single, and I don't want to change a syllable. Ed. I need the piano on it, Daniel said. Simple, just underneath. Ed. Whatever you want, Marcus said. Everything else stays. Ed. Diane lowered her hands. Her eyes were red. She was not the kind of woman who apologized for that, which Daniel respected. Ed. Daniel, she said. Yeah, he said. What's it called? Ed. He looked down at the piece of paper, at Rachel's name at the top. Ed. At the 2 words he'd crossed out, and the 2 words he'd written underneath. At the song title he'd written above the first verse 3 nights ago, alone at the kitchen table, the apartment quiet around him. Still here, he said. Nobody spoke for a moment. Then Marcus said, yeah. Ed. That's right. They spent 2 more hours in the studio. Ed. They brought in a pianist, a young woman named Carla, who Marcus had called that morning. Ed. And she listened to the raw recording once, and then sat down at the keys and played what the song needed, not what she might have added to any other song, but specifically what this one asked for. Ed. Minimal, present. The piano the way a hand on a shoulder is present, not intruding, just there. Ed. By the time they recorded the final version it was past noon. Ed. Daniel had a job at 2 on the south side that he had not canceled and was not going to cancel, and he said so. Ed. Go, Marcus said. Pete has everything he needs. We'll do the mixing this week, and I'll send you a file by Friday. Ed. Daniel nodded. He folded the piece of paper, put it back in his inside pocket. Ed. At the door he stopped. Marcus, he said, yeah. The show, the featured performance, it's in 10 days. Ed. I know, Marcus said. I want to sing Still Here. Ed. Not Heaven's Door, not anything else. Marcus looked at him. Ed. The song we just recorded 2 hours ago. Yes, Ed. The show might push back. They were expecting something known, something that connects to the audition narrative. Ed, I know what they were expecting, Daniel said, but you told me the second song should tell people who I really am. Ed, this is who I really am, he paused. The audition was about proving something. Ed, the performance should be about saying something. Those are different. Marcus held his gaze for a long moment. I'll call Whitfield, he said. Ed, Whitfield pushed back. Marcus called Daniel that evening to tell him, and Daniel could hear in Marcus's voice that the conversation with the producer had been a pointed one. Ed, he says the audience expects the Heaven's Door connection. Ed, he says the whole segment is built around the Victoria angle, the judge dynamic, the redemption narrative. Ed, the redemption narrative, Daniel repeated his words. Ed, Daniel was quiet. I'm not someone's redemption narrative, he said. Ed, I'm a man who wrote a song about his wife and his daughter. Ed, that's what I'm going to sing. If you push back on this, they might reframe the segment in a way you don't like. Ed, then they reframe it, Daniel said. I'm not going to stand on that stage and sing someone else's story when I have my own. Ed, a pause on the line. I'll tell him, Marcus said. And his voice, beneath the professional neutrality, had something in it that wasn't neutral at all. Ed, it had the sound of a man who was glad to make the call. Ed, Whitfield agreed on Thursday, 4 days before the performance. Ed, not graciously, the agreement came with conditions about arrangement approval and a production meeting that Daniel attended and sat through patiently, saying yes to the things that didn't matter and no to the things that did. Ed, the show's creative team had built a segment introduction that leaned heavily on the Victoria angle. Ed, Daniel asked them to cut it to 30 seconds. They compromised on 45. Ed, he didn't fight every battle. He picked the ones that touched the song itself, and on those he didn't move. Ed, 2 days before the performance, Victoria Lane called him. Ed, not a text this time, a call, he answered. I heard what you're doing, she said. Ed, singing the new song, not Heaven's Door. You heard fast, he said. Ed, the industry is smaller than it looks, she said. Ed, I wanted you to know I think it's the right call. Ed, he didn't say anything. I also wanted to tell you something. Ed, my team there's been a lot of noise about the Rolling Stone headline. Ed, about the narrative. My people want me to appear on the show's featured segment as a kind of full circle moment. Ed, the judge and the contestant reconciling on camera, a pause. Ed, I told them no. Daniel was quiet. I said no because what happened between you and me happened in a coffee shop, not in front of cameras, and that's where it belongs. Her voice was steady, but there was something careful underneath it. Ed, your story doesn't need me in it to be complete. I didn't want to insert myself. Ed, he absorbed that. I appreciate that, he said. She said, I've been working on something since that morning at Cotter's. Something new. I haven't written a new song in 4 years. Ed, I didn't realize I'd stopped until I watched you walk off that stage, and I felt something that I'd forgotten was possible to feel in a room with music in it. A pause. Ed, I don't know yet what it is, but I wanted you to know that something started. Ed, Daniel thought about relay replacements and temporary fixes, and the difference between solving a problem and deferring it. Ed, good, he said simply. A brief silence. Ed, go sing your song, Victoria Lane said. I will, he said. Ed, the night of the performance, Daniel got to the studio at 4 p.m. for sound check. Ed, Carla was there with the piano. Pete was running the audio for the broadcast. Ed, Marcus was in the production area with Whitfield's team, navigating the final logistics with the patience of someone who had done this long enough to know which fires to put out and which to let burn themselves out on their own. Ed, Sophie was backstage with Keeley, who had specifically requested to be her handler for the evening and had arrived with a juice box and a deck of cards, which suggested she had done her research on 8-year-olds. Ed, at 5:15, Daniel stood at the side of the stage during a rehearsal break, and Sophie came and stood next to him. Ed, they could hear the crew on the other side of the curtain, the sound of seats filling, the building ambient noise of an audience assembling itself. Ed, Sophie was in a blue dress this time, no cardboard sign. Ed, she'd decided, she told him, that tonight she didn't need it. Ed, you heard the song, he said. Last week, she confirmed. Ed, when you got home from the studio, you sang it for me in the kitchen. Ed, what did you think? She looked at the curtain, at the shadow of the stage on the other side of it. Ed, I think Mom is in it, she said. He looked at her. Ed, I think you put her in every line, Sophie said. And I think that's the right place for her. She paused. Ed, I also think it's my song now, too. Is that okay? Ed, It's always been your song, he said. I just didn't know how to finish it until you showed me what it was for. Ed, she reached up and took his hand, the way she only did in private. Ed, don't cry on stage, she said. I wasn't planning to. Ed, I know you, she said. You might. He squeezed her hand. Ed, go find Keely. She let go and walked back toward the family area. Ed, and he watched her go with the particular feeling a parent carries when they realize the child they are raising is already more fully themselves than anything the parent could have designed or planned. Keely appeared at his elbow. 10 minutes, Mr. Carter. Ed, Daniel, he said. She smiled. 10 minutes. Ed, he stood at the side of the stage and was still, not the stillness of a man suppressing something. Ed, the stillness of a man who has arrived somewhere and knows it. Ed, who has crossed a distance he didn't fully believe was crossable and is standing on the other side of it, looking back, taking stock. Ed, he thought about 4:47 in the morning. Ed, he thought about the mattress springs and the dripping faucet and the water stain on the ceiling and the note in the lunch bag, different every day, triangles because they tasted better than rectangles. Ed, he thought about elevator 4 and the relay replacement and writing the same true thing 4 times because it was true whether or not anyone was ready to hear it. He thought about a voice note from an 8-year-old that said, I did something, and I'm not sorry. Ed, he thought about Rachel. He reached into the inside pocket of his jacket and touched the piece of paper. Still there. He heard his name announced. He walked out. Ed. The audience was larger than the audition night. The featured segment had pulled numbers. The segment producer had told Marcus that the show hadn't seen in 2 seasons. Ed, 2,400 people, 11 cameras, a broadcast that would reach 14 million homes. Ed, Daniel walked to the microphone and looked at the room. Ed, Victoria Lane was not at the judges' table tonight. This was a performance segment, not a competition. The table was gone. The room was configured differently, less formal, more like a concert space. Ed, Marcus was somewhere in the production area. Diane Chen was in the audience, 4th row, and she caught his eye when he found her, and she nodded once. Ed, he didn't look for Sophie. He knew where she was. She was the reason he was standing here, and she would always be the reason, and he didn't need to confirm that with a glance. Ed, he looked at Carla, seated at the piano to his left. Ed, she raised her eyebrows. Ready? He nodded. She played the opening. Ed, 4 bars. Simple and clean, the piano like a hand on a shoulder, present but not pressing. Daniel closed his eyes for one breath. Then he opened them and sang. Ed, he sang about a 5 a.m. alarm, and a suit that didn't fit quite right, and a daughter with her mother's eyes who believed in him before he remembered how to believe in himself. Ed, he sang about an empty kitchen, and a voice that had nowhere to go, and a song that had been sitting unfinished for 11 years, waiting for the man who wrote it to be ready. Ed, he sang about the weight of grief carried quietly for so long that you forget its weight and start to think it's just the shape of you. Ed, and he sang about the moment you put it down. The audience was still almost from the first note, but Ed, not the stunned stillness of the audition, where people were surprised out of their expectations. Ed, this was different. This was the stillness of people who had been handed something and were holding it carefully. Ed, the woman in the 4th row to the left who had her eyes closed. Ed, the man in the back who had his arm around his wife and was not looking at the stage but at her face. Ed, the teenager near the aisle who was not on his phone. Ed, Carla followed him through every turn of the melody with the precision of someone who understood that her job was to serve the song, not to perform alongside it. Ed, at the bridge, the emotional center, the moment where the song broke open into what it was actually about, Daniel's voice climbed. Ed, not the controlled technical climb of the high C on audition night. Ed, this was different, rawer, more exposed. The note he reached at the top of the bridge was not about proving a range. Ed, it was about meaning something large enough to require that much space to say it. Ed, the audience felt the difference without being able to name it. Ed, a man in the 7th row put his hand over his eyes. Ed, Diane Chen sat completely still. Somewhere in the family section, a small girl in a blue dress was pressing both hands to her chest. Ed, Daniel sang through the final verse. Ed, he sang the last line of the song, the line he had written last. Ed, the line that had taken him 3 nights to find. Ed, the line that was the truest thing he had ever put into words, and as he sang it, Ed, his voice was so quiet that the room leaned toward it, 2,400 people bending forward as one body to catch the sound. The last note ended. Carla lifted her hands from the keys. The silence lasted 4 full seconds, then the room broke. Ed. It broke the way a room breaks when the thing that happens in it is not entertainment but truth, not the sound of applause exactly, but the sound of people releasing something they had been holding without knowing they were holding it. Ed. People on their feet before they decided to stand. Ed. A sound that was enormous and continuous and kept building. Ed. And inside of it, Ed, if you listen carefully, Ed, you could hear something that was not applause at all, but was the sound of people recognizing something they had forgotten they knew. Ed. Daniel stood still in the center of it. He held the piece of paper in his left hand, the hand that wasn't holding the microphone. Ed. He hadn't looked at it. He hadn't needed to. But he held it because she was in it, and she deserved to be in the room for this. Ed. He found Diane Chen. She was standing and she was not trying to contain her expression anymore. Ed. He found Marcus in the production area, standing with both arms crossed and his chin down, the posture of a man containing something. Ed. He found Keely in the family section doorway. Ed. And beside her, Ed, in a blue dress. Ed. Standing on her chair with both arms raised exactly the way she had stood on the night of the audition. Ed. Exactly the way she always stood when she needed the world to see her father the way she saw him. Ed. Sophie. Her face was completely open. No performance, no strategy, no 8-year-old calculating the right response. Ed. Just a daughter looking at her father with pure, uncomplicated love and the absolute certainty that she had always known this was there and had simply been waiting for everyone else to catch up. Ed. He raised his hand. She raised both of hers higher. Ed. The applause went on for a long time. Backstage afterward, he found her before anyone else found him. Ed. She was with Keely, who handed him a water, and then stepped away with the practiced discretion of someone who understood what the moment required. Sophie looked up at him. "You didn't cry," she said. "Ed, I didn't cry," he confirmed. "I cried a little," she said. "Ed, just so you know. I'm not embarrassed about it. Nothing to be embarrassed about," he said. Ed, she looked at him, that direct, assessing look. "Dad." Ed, "Are you happy?" He thought about it the way he had taught her to think about real questions, not the first answer, but the true one underneath it. "Ed," he said. "For real." She nodded. Satisfied. The way she nodded when things were as they should be. "Ed, good," she said, and she reached up and took his hand. Ed, the months that followed moved with a momentum that Daniel never pushed and never chased. Ed, he worked with Marcus through the fall. Ed, finishing the album 8 songs. Ed, all of them his. Ed, none of them performances and all of them true. Ed, he kept his job through September, not because he had to, but because he had given Roger his word, and he kept his words. Ed, when he finally told Roger he was leaving, Roger shook his hand for a long time and didn't say anything, which from Roger was the same as a speech. Ed, he picked Sophie up from school every day without exception. Ed, that was the one condition he had placed on everything, not in a contract, not in a meeting, just in the first conversation he'd had with anyone about what this life was going to look like. Ed, I pick up my daughter. Everything else is negotiable. Ed, that is not. Nobody had argued. Still Here was released in November. Ed, it went to #1 in its first week. Ed, not the kind of #1 that required 10 years of industry relationships and promotional machinery, the kind that happens when a song lands somewhere real in people, and they send it to each other without being told to. Ed, it spread the way the clip had spread, except slower and wider, and with more staying power, because a clip lasts a moment and a song lasts as long as someone needs it. Daniel watched it happen from a small apartment on the north side of Chicago where the faucet still dripped and the ceiling still had a water stain above the couch that looked like a cloud nobody asked for. Ed, he fixed the faucet in December. He had the time. He did not fix the water stain. Ed, Sophie had decided it looked like a whale and had started drawing whales in her sketchbook, and he was not going to take that from her. Ed, he performed at the charity concert for single parents on the 15th of December. Ed, 10,000 people. Ed, he had accepted the invitation within 24 hours of receiving it, not because of the size, Ed, not because of the visibility, Ed, but because the woman who ran the organization had called him and said simply, "Ed, these are your people. Come sing for them." He sang 4 songs. The last one was Still Here. Ed, he dedicated it from the stage to every person in the room who had gotten up at 5 in the morning and made the lunch and written the note and driven the route and kept themselves pointed in the right direction when everything in the world was. Ed, telling them there was no direction worth pointing toward. Ed, the room knew what he was talking about. The room had always known. On the morning of the new year, Daniel woke at 4:47 without the alarm. Old habit, body clock. He sat on the edge of the mattress in the dark and counted the 60 seconds the way he always counted them. Silence before the day. Then he stood up. He walked to Sophie's doorway. She was asleep. Face down. Arms out. Hair wild across the pillow. Her mother's hair. He stood in the doorway and looked at her the way he had looked at her every morning for 8 years. The thing that kept him straight. "Love you, baby girl," he said. Not loud enough to wake her, just loud enough to mean it. He went to the kitchen. He started the coffee. He made her lunch peanut butter and strawberry jam. Wheat bread. Triangles. And he sat down at the table with the piece of paper he still kept in the kitchen drawer. And he thought about what to write on the note today. He thought about 12 months that had changed the shape of his life without changing the shape of his character. He thought about an audition and a coffee shop and a studio on the near North Side and a stage with 10,000 people and a song that had been unfinished for 11 years and was now playing in living rooms and cars and headphones all over the country, doing what songs do when they are true, finding the people who need them and staying there. He picked up the pen. He wrote 4 words. He folded the note, tucked it beside the juice box, zipped the bag, set it by the door. He poured his coffee. He stood at the kitchen counter in the early dark of a new year, in the small apartment where everything had started and everything had changed and everything that mattered still lived. And he drank it in the silence he had earned. The silence of a man who had stopped surviving and started living, and who had found, on the other side of 11 years of quiet and grief and 5 a.m., mornings and packed lunches and love given without audience or applause, that the voice was still there. It had always been there. Waiting the way the truest things wait, not impatiently. Not with demand. But with the steady certainty of something that knows its own worth and does not require the world's permission to exist. He finished his coffee, set the cup down. The note in Sophie's lunch bag said, "You already know it," and she did, and so did he.